Chapter 38, The Animals, Hanyu's POV. I can't, Antony choked against his shoulder. I'm sorry. Hanyu, for once, managed to say nothing. Ordinarily, he would have relished the feeling of Antony clinging to him like this. It would be even better than the feeding he was being denied. Ordinarily, Antony wouldn't be shaking like this. Hanyu knew he wasn't always the most perceptive person, but he was fairly sure that this was about more than his collapse the other day. The anguish and terror on his master's face before he wrenched himself away from Hanyu's neck had been physically painful to see. What could have caused his ancient, irascible god to look like that? What's wrong? Hanyu asked in a near whisper. No answer, more shaking. He pressed ahead, giving voice to some of the half-formed ideas whirling around in his head. Antony, are you all right? Did you... That's enough. Lord Antony's voice was sharp and authoritative, and steadier than Hanyu would have expected. The god pulled back from him and sat up straight. His face was so stern that Hanyu couldn't help but wonder whether he'd imagined the sight of his master shattering in front of him. He dropped his gaze in submission, feeling his cheeks heat. Of course. I'm sorry, my lord. I know I don't have any right to question you. How many times had the priest tried to drill that into his head? He could hear Father Shu's voice even now, level and patient. You mustn't ask so many questions, Hanyu. The gods will have more important things to do than explain themselves to you. That isn't what I meant. It was Antony's voice now, not the faraway priest's. His tone was softer than before, even gentle. When he heard it, Hanyu dared to raise his eyes. His master met his gaze with a small, pained smile. I don't want questions about that, but of course you're allowed to ask me about other things. Anything? Hanyu pressed. He shouldn't push. Even if his god wasn't as upset as he thought he was, this clearly wasn't the time. Still, it was intriguing to think that another of the priest's regulations might be lifted. There were so many things he wanted to ask. Antony considered for a moment, then nodded. If I don't want to answer, I won't, but you're allowed to ask. He should leave it alone. He should thank his master for the permission and leave it alone. But the questions were frothing and bubbling in his head, and it was unbearable to think of not knowing the answers for even a moment longer. He shouldn't. Are there other lands? Hanyu blurted. Antony blinked at him, long, slow blinks that made the god look terribly tired. Hanyu felt a pang of guilt for bothering him. Yes, lots of them. Hanyu had known ever since he saw the maps, but he still gave an awestruck little wiggle of joy. Really? With people? Most of them, Antony nodded. And animals? All of them. What kind of animals? And are the people like us? Like me, I mean. I know you're not really people. Antony snorted. If I had more energy, I'd be offended. Why? Surely it would be disrespectful to include a god in any kind of us. Hanyu understood that he wasn't Lord Antony's equal, and he had no desire to act as if he didn't know his place. There was no time to worry, because Antony was standing and walking away. Hanyu made to rise as well, but the god waved him off. I'll be right back. One moment. When Antony returned, he had a handful of books. When he opened the first of them, Hanyu saw that it was full of the mysterious looping script. What's that writing? He pointed. Our language, Antony said. The gods. Hanyu had guessed as much, but it was nice to have confirmation. What surprised him was the sad, faraway look that came over Antony's face as he went on, saying, the language they speak back home. Do you miss it? Your home, I mean? Antony looked up, his wistful expression dissolving into annoyance. That one I won't answer. Anyhow, I didn't bring these to show you my alphabet. Look. He flipped several pages, then pointed to a picture. It was an animal that Hanyu had never seen before. It was a little like an antelope, but thick and powerful instead of delicate, with huge hooves half covered in a fringe of hair. It also had no horns, so not much at all like an antelope, really. Long hair, like a person's, flowed down its neck. Its tail was made of hair as well, and so long it looked like a wig affixed to the broad hindquarters. That's a horse, Antony said. Back home, they ride them. We tried to bring some to your city once, but camels are simply better suited to the desert. It's a pity. Horses aren't quite so bad-tempered. Hanyu swore, right then, that he would ride one of those creatures if it was the last thing he ever did. Well, not bad-tempered if it's an ordinary horse. Antony turned the page to show another picture of a horse. This one was a little more delicate, and Hanyu thought it was much prettier than the first. This is an Owskie. Lovely, isn't it? And you'll never find a stronger or faster mount, provided it never smells salt water. At the first whiff, it'll plunge you into the water with you on its back, drown you, and eat you. Hanyu amended his wish. Perhaps riding camels wasn't so bad, even if they grumbled and spat. His master turned the page, and a new creature was revealed. This animal seemed a little like a jackal, but longer, larger, with a sharp face and pricked ears. That's a wolf, Antony said. They live and hunt in packs. They make such noises. Everybody talks about the howling, which is fair. It's thin and lonely and wild, and quite lovely in its way, but I always found their snarling more frightening. It sounds more malicious than any noise out of an animal has a right to do. Used to send chills down my spine and raise every damn hair on my body when we would go out walking or hunting. Antony's reminiscence seemed less sad now. His face was less drawn and exhausted, almost animated. He was enjoying this as much as his offering. Hanyu relaxed into the sofa, and the glow of pleasure and closeness permeated his whole body. Antony picked up another book in a different alphabet. He flipped it open to a picture that gave Hanyu pause for a moment. Was that an animal or a rock? An animal, he decided, when he got a sense for the legs and saw the eyes, but a very strange one. The creature had great stiff plates all over itself and horns in strange places. That's a rhinoceros, Antony said. Hanyu gasped. Do you ride those? His master laughed. I wouldn't recommend it, and for goodness sakes, don't bring the idea up to Cloelia. She just might try it. When we first saw them, they're not from our home, we saw them elsewhere, she decided to see if she could wrestle one to the ground barehanded. Did she win? Hanyu asked. Eventually, after half her bones had been smashed to splinters. She didn't kill it, though. She said that wasn't the point. Not that she could say much of anything by then. Thaddeus was in tears over the state of her, but Julia just rolled her eyes and said Cloelia was lucky she was pretty enough for her to bother putting it back together. Those three have a strange dynamic. Hanyu thought that Antony and Lord Marcus's dynamic was stranger, but he managed to keep that observation to himself until the god turned another page. This new creature was the rhinoceros's opposite, long and graceful, its body sleek with muscle. A closer look showed powerful forelegs with long, dangerous-looking claws, and on its pointed head, were those human ears? A rompo, Antony said, pointing. I've only caught glimpses of them, but my brother and some of his crew saw one out in the open eating a corpse once. They said it made little sing-song noises while it ate, like it was trying to lull the body to sleep. I think it gave them a good scare. They eat people? Hanyu gasped. The chilly trickle of fright that went down his spine was half pleasure. It was fun to be a little frightened by a faraway monster when he was tucked against Antony's side in the god's own cozy rooms. Only the ones that are already dead, Antony said. They're actually quite timid. If they're cornered, they'll change colors like a chameleon and try to hide. What's a chameleon? Oh, hold on. Antony grabbed another book and started rifling through the pages. This was perfect. Antony was cheerful and loose and sharing, satisfying Hanyu's curiosity and seeming pleased to do so. What could be better? Hanyu shifted a little closer on the sofa. Antony seemed happy with him, happier than Lord Marcus seemed to be with Asau, happier than Antony seemed to be with Lord Marcus, though that thought was probably blasphemous and definitely presumptuous. But still, Antony had said that he liked him and called him beautiful so many times and in so many ways that Hanyu was almost beginning to believe him. So why haven't you bedded me? The words were out before Hanyu had even finished the thought. Antony looked up from the book he was still searching, his eyes round and shocked. Hanyu felt his cheeks flush even hotter at his graceless delivery and his master's dumbfounded state. Damn it, what was wrong with him? Antony was going to think he was aroused by animal facts. He rushed to make his question more acceptable. I know this isn't really the time. It just slipped out. I'm sorry. Ah. Antony's face relaxed a little. All right. The god started to look back down at the book. No, it might not have been the best time for the question, but Hanyu had finally got up the courage to ask, and he couldn't let the moment go. I know you will grant the honor of your bed to anyone you want, he pressed on, but please, I really have been wondering, is there anything at all I could do to work towards earning? Shit. Antony stayed silent. If Hanyu had had to put a word to the god's demeanor, he would have said that his master seemed frozen. It wasn't ideal, but it also wasn't disgust or fury, so it could be worse. He should have stuck to the animals. Hanyu tried to match Antony's silence, but after a moment he couldn't bear the tension any longer. Is there something I'm doing wrong? Or am I simply not beautiful enough? He asked. As soon as that question was out, he was crying again. He couldn't have said whether it was from embarrassment or yearning or simply the final dregs of the misery he'd felt when he learned that his master had chosen to feed from Kenta instead of him. Whatever the reason, the tears traced hot, wet trails down his cheeks and clogged his throat until he could barely speak. Unfortunately, he wasn't quite sobbing yet, so he was still able to get words out just fine. I know I'm not much, but I swear I've been well trained, and if you would just give me a chance and use me one time, I would do my best to make it good for you. It all came out in a rush. Stop that. Antony's voice was gentle, but a little off. Was the god angry? His hands were gentle as he closed the animal book and laid it aside, so perhaps not. Perhaps Hanyu hadn't ruined everything quite yet. It isn't your looks, Hanyu, Antony said. His shoulder was stiff where it touched Hanyu's, but his voice was thick and tired rather than angry. You know I think you're lovely, and I have no doubt you would be a wonderful lover. You are generous and enthusiastic and attentive to others, all of which are excellent traits in bed. But you should grant those wonderful gifts elsewhere. There isn't even the slightest thing wrong with you, but I don't bed humans. Each virtue he listed felt like a fresh slap in Hanyu's face. Lovely, but not enough to make me want someone like you. Generous, enthusiastic, attentive, excellent traits, but not enough to make me want someone like you. What was so bad about humans, so disgusting? It didn't seem to bother Antony's lover, that was for sure. But why not? Hanyu wailed. Lord Marcus uses a sow, I am not Marcus, and I will not use you the way he uses a sow, Antony interrupted, his voice loud and sharp enough to stop Hanyu's own words in his mouth. His master's voice hit like a lash, and Hanyu felt the blood draining from his face. He realized that the god had never raised his voice to him before. He had fucked up. Oh gods, how he had fucked up. Lord Antony was going to get rid of him for sure. Hanyu slipped from the couch and folded into a bow. He felt a little better once he was properly positioned for an apology, but where would that apology even start? What should he beg mercy for first? He had questioned his master's choices regarding his use twice today, and not even politely. He'd argued and whined when presented with the god's clearly stated will, and he'd been so horribly demanding. If the priest had known he would ever behave this way, he would have been thrown out on his ass, even if they'd only had an hour to prepare his replacement. Worse yet, he had known that Antony was upset. He had felt him shaking, seen his face. The god had been holding himself together by a thread, and instead of making him feel better and helping him relax, Hanyu had pressed and poked and gotten upset with him, totally consumed by his own desires and giving no thought to Lord Antony's needs. That didn't just make him a terrible offering, it made him an unkind person. And then he had done the worst thing of all. There was shifting and movement, and then Lord Antony's voice was coming from so close that the god had to be kneeling right in front of him. I'm sorry I frightened you, Hanyu, he said softly. I didn't mean to raise my voice. A chilly hand descended on his head. It gave his hair a light, tentative stroke, as if the god were getting ready to pull it back. Hanyu leaned into his touch, and his master's fingers grew firmer. He kept up the gentle stroking. It should have soothed Hanyu more than it did, but at least it centered him enough that he was able to decide what to apologize for first. All of the other problems with his behavior were trivial, Hanyu knew, compared with one. But please forgive me, he managed, his voice shaking and his head still pressed into the carpet. It was wrong for me to compare you to the other gods, my lord. I am grateful to belong to you. I know that you are my master, no one else, and you will use me as you see fit. I know I have no right to demand that you feed from me or bed me or anything. I am so sorry for making demands. I'm ready to accept my punishment for my ingratitude. He was working hard to request his well-earned punishment without actually using the forbidden words, but no punishment that he could imagine would atone if he had actually managed to make Lord Antony think that he would have preferred another master to him. Oh gods! Oh gods! What if Lord Antony gave him away? What if he put him in the barracks with the others? What if he traded him to Lord Marcus? Hanyu would have the shouting and the punishments, and worse than that, he would lose his own kindly, grumbling god because he was a horrible, pushy, ungrateful, spoiled... Lord Antony interrupted the spiral by speaking again, but he didn't pause his soothing touches to Hanyu's hair. I'm not going to punish you, he said, and Hanyu's heart sank. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one who snapped. That was uncalled for, and I am truly sorry. I have been very rattled for a lot of the day, That's not an excuse. I'm just telling you why it happened. I hope if you can understand, you can please forgive me?" Those words shocked Hanyu almost as much as the ones that had put him on the floor. If an offhanded sorry now and then was different from what he expected, this was a whole other world. He jerked up, not quite breaking his bow, but crouching up higher on his elbows so he could see his master's face, and gasped out a shocked, "My lord!" Lord Antony moved his hand down from Hanyu's hair to gently cup his chin. Hanyu wished he wouldn't. The flesh of his chin was slick with tears or snot or both. Still, the god maintained steady eye contact, and once Hanyu met those eyes, he was lost. There wasn't the slightest hint of mocking or irritation there. His master looked purely remorseful, purely concerned, purely sincere. "I was very wrong," Lord Antony said, and even the slow seriousness of his voice could not hide how strange the words were on his tongue. "It is not acceptable for me to raise my voice with you. I frightened you for the 3rd day in a row. I'm bad at this. Please forgive me for that, Hanyu." Hanyu wasn't often lost for words, but Antony's apology and the appeal on his master's face seemed to have driven them all away. This was deeply wrong. He was not owed an apology. He should be punished severely. He had been pushing and pestering and forgetting his place in the most appalling manner. A raised voice was the least particle of what he deserved for his behavior. Lord Antony waited. He didn't fidget or look away. Hanyu forced himself to speak, halting and stumbling. "That is not necessary, my lord," he managed. "I was wrong to ask, and so wrong to imply. I want to be yours, no one else's." "Thank you." Lord Antony looked a little relieved, and Hanyu clung to the thought that he had somehow said something right. "But I still shouldn't have shouted." "It wasn't really a shout." Hanyu clamped his mouth shut. Was he really arguing right now? What was wrong with him? "Nevertheless, I frightened you again. Can you forgive me?" For the 2nd time today, Hanyu was faced with a situation his training had in no way prepared him for. They had learned a lot about how to apologize. They had never learned how to respond to a god apologizing to them. It was the weary patient in Lord Antony's eyes that undid him. Maybe Hanyu didn't think his master had done anything wrong, but the god clearly did, and he looked so tired. Hanyu remembered his panic and his tremors, but he seemed perfectly ready to sit there for the rest of the day, awaiting Hanyu's judgment if necessary. The god was not good at apologizing. The words dragged awkwardly out of him, but he just sat there and waited with his scowl lines deliberately smoothed out, as if nothing in the world mattered more than making amends with this stupid, ungrateful slave. Maybe not ungrateful. Maybe Hanyu had been ungrateful earlier, but right now gratitude and affection were all he could feel. His Antony was so patient and tired and grim in his remorse, and it was all so unutterably dear. The sight of him like this felt like more than one heart could hold. "All right," Hanyu whispered. "I forgive you. I love you."